Joining us now is Senator Marco Rubio from the great state of Florida. Sir, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I saw your piece on this, slamming the president for doing that. I would have walked right by. I don't know about you. I would have just walked exactly right by.
Actually, interestingly enough, George H.W. Bush was at a summit early in his presidency where Fidel Castro was at, and he did the exact same thing. He just walked right by him. But look, here's the thing I'd say to you about this. I think the irony of it is that they are here commemorating the life of a person who dedicated his life, particularly in his later years, to bringing democracy and equality of opportunity and so forth to the people of South Africa, and yet here shaking the hands of a dictator and of a tyrant, someone who systematically denies these rights to the Cuban people. So I think it's a reminder that in parts of this world, including among some of the hypocrites who were there at that event, who actually systematically deny their own people the very rights and the very opportunities that Mandela dedicated his life to and is being commemorated for.
I think it's a good point, because Cuba today remains a totalitarian state with ties to some of the worst regimes in the world, and that means terrorist states. And unless and until they change their ways, we're never going to have normalized relations with Cuba, which, by the way, I would be great. But until the Cuban people are freed, I never told you this. I became friends with a guy by the name of Armando de Quesada. Mm-hmm. Armando de Quesada, he barely, during the revolution, he's since passed away, barely escaped with his life. And he told me the whole story about how everybody's property was taken by the state, how many people were killed. He was part of the resistance, and how many people were slaughtered in the name of this regime. I mean, that's the reality that, I know everyone on the left thinks that you can just get along with people, but until they become human beings, and unless they become human beings, they don't deserve the time of day.
Well, interestingly enough, you talk about the media for a second. I read this somewhere recently. I forgot exactly where it was, but I'll give them credit ahead of time. They talk about how the media covers these people. You know, when they talk about someone who they view as a right-wing dictator, they call him a dictator. When they see a left-wing figure like a Raul Castro, they call him the president of Cuba. Raul Castro's never been democratically elected to anything, nor was his brother Fidel, and they rule with an iron fist. It's very simple. It happens every day systematically in Cuba. People who speak out against the government are dissidents, and even those who are actually dissidency in Cuba has become opposition, are systematic. They are beaten by government mobs. They are jailed. They are separated from their families. Some are forced into exile. This is going on right now. That's not 50 years ago or 30 years ago. That's right now. And we have, by the way, Cuba right now, and that's the other part that's ironic. Cuba right now has an American hostage. His name is Alan Gross. He was a USAID worker who was in Cuba, basically distributing satellite radio to the small Jewish community that remains in Cuba, and he's in jail, being held hostage by the Cuban government, who is asking for some Cuban spies to be released in order for them to release this innocent man. Maybe he should have asked Raul Castro about that when he saw him today.
Well, I mean, just like, for example, there was a lot of talk, the new president of Iran, and whether or not that Obama would meet with him, and there was talk that he might even go to Iran. I mean, you have this Christian pastor that has been imprisoned. We released a nuclear scientist back to Iran, and the president never negotiated the release of this guy in this horrible nuclear deal that he's making with this rogue state.
Well, it's not just horrible, it's dangerous, because what's going to happen is, in addition to Iran pursuing a nuclear war, they're following the playbook of North Korea. Okay, the North Korean playbook was use negotiations to buy time, and then when the world is distracted or paying attention to something else, then we'll get our weapon or our weapon capability. And the danger in this is that if there is an Iranian nuclear weapon, there will soon thereafter be a Saudi nuclear weapon and potentially a Turkish one as well. So you're now going to have nuclear proliferation in the most violent and unstable region of the world. That is the risk of this deal, and that's why there's actually bipartisan skepticism and even condemnation of the outlines of it.
Look, I could even see or foresee the Saudis aligning with the Israelis to take out Iranian nuclear sites, which, by the way, is not an easy task, because they're spread all throughout the country, buried deep into the ground, and it is probably one of the most difficult, if near impossible, military efforts for the Israelis or anybody else. Now, if the United States helped to take out these facilities rather than negotiating with a state that sponsors terror and foments proxy wars all over the place, we'd have a much better chance, but that's not going to happen with this president.
Well, I think that you've touched on the key points there when we talk about Iran. It's not just about the nuclear weapons. It's about a government that sponsors terrorism anti-American terrorism as a tool of statecraft. This is a government that plotted to assassinate the Saudi ambassador right here in Washington, D.C. This is a government that's actually shared the technology that built many of the IEDs that have maimed and killed American servicemen. This is a government that's an active sponsor of Hezbollah. This is a government that's pursuing an ambitious long-range rocket capability, which means they're trying to build a rocket that can one day not just reach Europe, but reach the continental United States. And this is a government that oppresses its own people, is executing people, oppresses Christians and religious minorities in their own, and of course any political opposition. So these are the people that supposedly we're supposed to sit down with and reach some sort of a reasonable agreement. These negotiations, their goal in these negotiations, Sean, were very straightforward. Go over there, try to gain as many relief from sanctions as possible, but do not agree to any irreversible concessions. And I think they've largely achieved that, at least in the short term here, unfortunately.
I want to move on because there's a lot of other news happening out there. You had recently come out and said about the immigration issue that the House should go about it piecemeal, meaning secure the borders first. And a lot of people were critical of you at the time. Well, why do you think that's the better way to go about it?
Well, that was obviously what I've actually preferred from the very beginning of this debate. Obviously, the Senate went in a different direction, and I wanted to influence that process and come up with the best bill possible in a Senate controlled by Democrats. But my view on it now is this. It's pretty clear, and I think it's obvious to all, that it's just not realistic to think the House is just going to take up and pass whatever the Senate did. They're not going to do it. It's been pretty clear. This remains a vexing issue for the country. What frustrates me is that there's agreement on 90% of it. I mean, people agree we have to modernize our legal immigration system so that it's more based on jobs and economics than it is about family, and just because you have a family member here, which is the basis of it now. We need to have better enforcement systems in place and border security, E-Verify, entry-exit tracking, et cetera. There's vast agreement on these things. So let's move on the things we agree on, and then we can create the conditions where perhaps we can finish the job. But it doesn't all have to be done in one big bill, and I think part of it now is, if you look at the dysfunction of Washington and the mistrust of this government, doing anything comprehensive on any issue, I think, is difficult to envision at this stage in the process. So I think that's a very reasonable approach to it, and it seems to be some willingness in the House to at least move on the things that there's broad consensus on. And this all-or-nothing approach, I think, is a guarantee that many of these problems we face with regards to immigration will remain in place, and that the status quo, which is damaging the country, will remain in place. But, of course, there's politics involved in this.
Let's talk a little bit about, we keep reading that in the next couple of days that the House, before they go out of session, might come up with this budget deal with Paul Ryan and Patty Murray, and the Heritage Action suspects that the sequestration is going to be removed. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I don't know the details of it, so I'll reserve judgment until we read it. I can tell you my view based on press reporting, and that is that what we really need is a government with less debt and an economy that's creating more stable middle-class jobs. And my sense from what I've read is that this budget is going to fail to accomplish those goals. It's going to make it harder for Americans to achieve the American dream, basically. And this, from what I've read, and again, I mean, it's important to reserve judgment until we've seen the details of it, but if there's a budget here passed that makes irresponsible decisions by spending more money than the government takes in, and it's going to impose not just more burdens on Americans today, it's going to continue to borrow money from our children in the future. And if it cancels earlier spending reductions without replacing them with the beginning of some substantial changes to the true drivers of our debt, which are these unsustainable programs, then I think we're in the same place we were at the beginning of this debate. So, we've got to deal with this issue at some point. This debt situation is very dangerous for the economy and the national security of the United States, both of them. I mean, it hurts our national security because a debt crisis would be extremely disruptive, but it also hurts job creation, and not to mention it leaves for our children, and quite frankly, not even our children, for many of us, the real prospects that over the next few years we're going to have a full-blown debt crisis that's going to have a horrifying impact on our economy, on our military readiness, on our tax rates, on our everything.
I don't understand why Republicans in general just don't go out and sell the penny plan to the American people. I'll tell you why I'm a big supporter of it. Number one, because it works, and it brings fiscal responsibility to Washington. And number two, it's something that I think everybody can understand. If you talk about cutting 1 penny out of every dollar that Washington spends, and you don't have these built-in increases with baseline budgeting, you don't even have to get that complicated. You say for 5 years we're cutting out a penny out of every dollar. And you explain that every American, if if they were spending too much money, this is exactly what they would do.
Right. But here's the difference between the federal government and virtually every other government in the country and our personal budgets. I was in the state legislature for 9 years. I was the Speaker of the House for the last 2. At the state level, every time we sat down to do a budget, we had something called a balanced budget amendment, which meant we couldn't spend more money than came in. And we had to balance. My last year as Speaker, we had to make some dramatic cuts in the budget, but we did that instead of raising taxes. And it was unpleasant, and it led to debate, and we were accused of not caring about people. But in the end, we did not leave the people of Florida saddled with massive debt. We didn't go out and borrow a bunch of money to balance our budget. The federal government doesn't have that restriction, and so that's why it doesn't have to do something like the penny plan solution or anything else, because quite frankly, for politicians in Washington, it's a lot easier to get reelected in the short term by avoiding some of the difficult decisions that await us. But the truth, Sean, is the longer we wait, the more painful these solutions will be, the more disruptive they will be, and quite frankly, the more irresponsible they are, because they truly are leaving future generations saddled with something no Americans have ever been saddled with, $17, $18, $19 trillion in debt.
Harry Reid now is trying to get you guys in the Senate. Now, one Republican voted for Obamacare, but now he's lashing out at Republicans saying that you're not willing to fix it. I'm like, why should you?
Well, it's not fixable. I mean, the concept is broken, and it's just the beginning. Look, people focus on the website, and I thought and continue to believe it's a disaster. But beyond it, here's the latest thing we're starting to hear from a lot of people. The deductibles on these things. I hope people understand this. You buy a plan with a $4,000 deductible. What that means is that before you can even start to use your insurance, you got to come up with $4,000 out of your pocket. Now, if you make $45,000 or $50,000 a year, you don't have $4,000 to spend on medical costs, and that's what you have to spend before you can even start using your insurance. So people are asking me, hold on a second, I have to pay $300 or $400 a month for insurance that I don't even get to use until I'm out of pocket $4,000. How does that make any sense? That's a direct result of Obamacare, and I predict that next year those deductibles are going to be even higher, and so are the premiums. And that's why this law is going to fall under its own weight here. I obviously am disturbed by the number of Americans that are hurt by it, the impact that it's having on our economy, but there is no way to fix Obamacare. It is a flawed concept that basically is hurting the vast majority of the American people in an effort to help I don't know who, because it really at the end it hurts everyone.
You thinking about running for president?
Who's that, me or you? Not today. I'm not. I think we're going to have some huge challenges here next year.
Did I ask you about if you're thinking about it today? I said, are you thinking about it at all?
I haven't, John, to be honest with you, and I know people may or may not believe that, but my focus is on the next year and the chances we have to do two things here. One is I hope we can make some progress on some of these issues we've talked about today, particularly on the foreign policy front. I think we are facing some, and you didn't even touch on the Asian situation with China, a very dangerous situation over there. The Japanese, the South Koreans are starting to doubt whether the U.S. is truly committed to remaining in that region, and as a result, they are considering what they need to do independently of us because of the Chinese aggression. And then you look at the election cycle next year. We have a real opportunity to have a majority in the Senate that will help set the stage to do things like repeal Obamacare, get our budget under control, start the hard work of getting spending under control and bringing taxes and regulations under control. We have some real good candidates around the country. Tom Cotton in Arkansas is one that we've gone heavy in with already. We have a chance to win the Senate, and I think that's something I'm going to focus on as well.